The fire was already burning, not only the flames but also the terror surrounding 3 young Christians trapped in the middle of the Iraqi desert. Nadia, Youssef, and Karim never imagined that the simple act of praying before caring for a wounded person could become a death sentence. Working as volunteers in a refugee camp devastated by war, they saw burned bodies, mutilated children, and desperate mothers every single day. Even so, they believed that every touch, every word, and every prayer were seeds of hope. But when an extremist group discovered them, their faith was put to the test. Captured, beaten, and taken to an abandoned factory, they were locked inside a metal container drenched in gasoline. Outside, the militants shouted, "Deny the name of Christ, and you will live." Inside, silence turned into prayer, and the fire began to roar. That was when the miracle truly began to unfold. And before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is going to move you deeply.
I can still hear the sound of the wind cutting through the tents of the camp, mixed with the cries of children and the distant noise of explosions. In that desert, where everything seemed dead, faith was the only living thing left within us. I remember every morning when the sun rose behind the sand mountains and Youssef and Karim walked among the wounded with hearts full of hope. Nadia always went ahead with that serene gaze that defied the pain around her. She carried a small Bible in the pocket of her coat, and before every treatment, we followed the same ritual. We took a deep breath, closed our eyes, and prayed in silence. We didn't ask for miracles, we asked for strength, and somehow, God always answered. It was an improvised camp, hastily built after an airstrike. The tents trembled with the hot wind, and the smell of blood mixed with sand was constant. I treated the soldiers' wounds, Karim handed out food, and Nadia knelt beside the children cleaning their faces with a damp cloth. Mothers came to us weeping with empty arms, begging for help, and we tried to do the impossible. We had almost nothing, only bandages, dirty water, and faith. Yet people came to us not just for medicine, but for something that could not be bought: hope. It was there, amid that chaos, that we began to notice something different. Muslims, Yazidis, and even wounded soldiers began to approach not only to receive care but to listen to our prayers. Some even asked us to pray for them as well. Faith was the only language everyone understood. Nadia always said, "When the desert hears a prayer, even the stones answer with hope." She truly believed that, and so did we. But the more the light spread, the stronger the shadows seemed to react. A man started appearing frequently in the camp. He wasn't a patient or a volunteer. He always stayed at a distance, watching, writing something in an old notebook. His eyes never blinked. Once I caught him staring directly at us during a prayer, his face frozen, expressionless. Nadia noticed too, but she simply said, "Do not be afraid, Youssef. The enemy only watches when the light bothers him." The following weeks were the most intense. The lines of the wounded grew longer, the food supply grew shorter, but faith grew stronger. People began calling that place the Camp of Light. With every prayer, someone was healed, someone wept in repentance, someone said they felt the presence of God there. It was impossible not to believe that something supernatural was happening, and perhaps that was exactly what began to disturb those who lived in darkness. One night, as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon and the cold air took over the desert, the silence felt heavier than usual. We were in the dining tent, a small shelter made of wood scraps and canvas, sharing the little we had, dry bread and lukewarm tea. Nadia asked us to pray before eating, and all the volunteers joined hands. "Lord, thank you that we can still serve, even among ruins. If the fire comes, let it only purify and never destroy." Those words echoed through the tent. Then came the noise, first distant, then deafening. Screams, rushed footsteps, the metallic sound of weapons being loaded. The canvas was torn apart, and armed men stormed in shouting in Arabic. Chaos took over. Someone kicked the table, the bread fell to the ground, children began to cry. One of them pointed his weapon directly at me. The leader, a tall man with his face covered, shouted, "Who brought the name of Jesus into this camp?" No one answered. Nadia tried to stand, but she was pushed back down. Karim took a step forward. "We're here only to help the wounded." The leader stepped closer, and with a cold voice replied, "You help in the name of a forbidden God." Before we could react, we were dragged outside, struck and kicked. The desert, which had so often been the setting of our hope, now felt like a courtroom. The wind lifted the sand, cutting our faces like blades. We were thrown into the back of a truck covered by a dark tarp. I could hear Nadia praying through her sobs. "Lord, do not abandon us." Karim, furious, shouted at the guards, "We only save lives." But every word seemed to feed their anger even more. The truck started moving, and the sound of the engine mixed with the cries of the children left behind broke my heart. Through a small gap in the tarp, I saw an old man trying to run after us. It was Mr. Ahmed, one of the oldest refugees in the camp. He stumbled in the sand, but still shouted, "They are good. They are children of peace." One of the armed men gave a dry laugh and shoved him with the barrel of his gun. I closed my eyes and prayed for God to protect him. The journey felt endless. Every jolt was a reminder that we were being taken to something worse than death. Night fell, and the desert's cold became cutting. Nadia trembled, not only from fear, but from exhaustion. "Yosef," she whispered, "promise me that no matter what happens, we will not deny our faith." I couldn't answer right away. My throat was dry. Fear paralyzed me. But after a few seconds, I just nodded. When the truck finally stopped, we were pushed out. We were standing before an old ruined factory, a grey building consumed by rust and silence. The moon illuminated only parts of the place, and everything seemed like something out of a nightmare. We were led inside, and the smell was strong: gasoline, burnt metal, and dust. In one corner there was a metal container, large enough to fit a car. I knew immediately what that meant. The men tied our hands and threw us inside. The sound of clanging metal echoed through the warehouse. The container was freezing, the floor covered in dirt, and the air almost unbreathable. Nadia rested her head on Karim's shoulder and began to cry. He, trying to hide his despair, punched the iron walls, shouting for help. I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come out. Time seemed to stand still inside. The hours dragged on, and the silence was broken only by the sound of the wind whipping through the cracks in the container. With each passing minute, the smell of gasoline grew stronger. I knew what that meant. It was the prelude to fire. During the early morning hours, my voice hoarse, I finally managed to speak. "Lord, if this is our end, may the fire be only a passage to you." Nadia approached and held my hand. "He is still with us, even here." But Karim exploded. "Where is God now, Yusef? Where is he when innocents are taken like criminals?" I understood his pain. It wasn't just fear, it was revolt. The kind of revolt that arises when heaven seems silent and hell roars. I tried to respond, but Nadia did before me. "Karim," she said firmly, "God never promised there wouldn't be fire, but he promised he would be with us inside it." Her words broke the silence. The three of us remained silent after that, just breathing the same heavy, hot air. I could hear the distant sound of the guards outside, laughing and talking as if nothing was happening. They spoke of dawn, of what they would do when the sun rose. And we knew. Dawn would bring judgment. It was there in that container, surrounded by rust, fear, and uncertainty, that I realized how much faith is tested when the fire hasn't even started yet. When everything inside you screams to give up, but something deeper insists on believing. The cold floor, the tight chains, and the darkness seemed to mock our confidence. But the more the fear grew, the clearer the presence of something invisible became, as if a silent light were among us, saying, "Hold on, I'm still here." No one said anything more. Nadia fell asleep, leaning against the wall, holding the Bible she carried in her pocket. Karim, still with his eyes open, stared at the iron ceiling, as if expecting to see the sky. And I could only hear the sound of my own heart beating, stronger and stronger, as if counting down the time that remained. That night felt far too long. The fire hadn't even started yet, but true hell was already burning inside. Fear, doubt, waiting, and deep down, I knew. Dawn would bring something that would change everything. When the first ray of sunlight pierced through the cracks in the container, I realized the night was over, but the real judgment was only beginning. The sound of boots echoing on the iron floor announced their return. The militant leader entered with firm steps, his shadow looming over us like a sentence. His gaze was cold, unwavering, as if he had already decided our fate before even hearing us. He raised his chin and said with a disturbing calm, "Deny your faith, and you will live." No shouts, no threats, just those dry words cutting through the heavy air. The silence that followed seemed eternal. Nadia was beside me, her face covered in dust and dried tears. Karim trembled but kept his eyes fixed on the ground, as if searching for courage in the cracks of the metal. I knew this was the moment. There would be no time to think. No rational answer would come. It was either spirit or fear. I took a deep breath and looked at them. Even if God doesn't deliver us, we will not deny him. My voice came out firm, but my heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in the silence that followed. The leader inclined his head, perhaps surprised by our calmness. One of the guards laughed disdainfully. "Then may your God come to save you." They left, and the container door slammed shut with a dry click. The sound of the latch was like the final seal of fate. We stood there embraced by the silence. Nadia began to sing, the same song we sang every morning in the camp before the meetings, a simple, gentle melody that spoke of trust amidst fear. Her voice trembled at first, but then gained strength, as if the Holy Spirit itself were singing along. Karim and I joined her. Those fragile voices echoed off the iron walls like a cry of faith. Suddenly we heard quick footsteps. Someone threw something against the container. The smell of gasoline filled the air. It was so strong it burned our noses. Karim closed his eyes and murmured, "It's starting." The flame was struck, and the sound of the lit match seemed to tear through time. In seconds, the fire spread. The walls began to hiss. The heat rose through our bodies and the air became scarce. Nadia continued praying, her hands raised, as if the fire were just a detail. The heat was unbearable. I could feel the metal vibrating beneath my knees. Flames roared outside and smoke seeped in through the cracks. It was at that moment that everything inside me screamed. I don't know if it was despair or faith, but I began to speak aloud without even thinking. "Lord, if this is our end, let it be singing your name. Let the fire take us, but let it not take your presence from us." The words came out between coughs and tears. I couldn't see anything but the orange light that shone through the cracks in the melting metal. But something began to change. The sound of the fire faded into the distance. The heat was still there, but it no longer hurt. It was as if a cool breeze swept through the container, even amidst the flames. I looked at Nadia. Her face was glowing, literally, as if a soft light emanated from within her. Karim stopped screaming. He was kneeling, his eyes closed, his body serene. I tried to understand, but there was no logic in that moment. The ground wasn't burning. The air wasn't suffocating. The fire was outside, but something invisible had surrounded us. Everything fell silent. No sound, no screams, only the echo of our singing voices. And then I felt it. I can't explain it. It was as if someone was with us inside, not a feeling, but a real presence, someone who wasn't one of us. I felt Nadia's hand touch mine and her body tremble. "Do you feel this, Youssef?" I just nodded, because yes, I felt it. Time lost its meaning. The flames continued outside, but inside there was peace. I don't know how much time passed before we heard distant shouts and the sound of approaching vehicles. There were gunshots, voices in Arabic, and then the bang of something exploding. I thought it was the end, but the container moved. I heard hurried footsteps, different voices, shouts of surprise. Someone outside spoke in Kurdish. The doors slid open with a metallic clang. Sunlight streamed in like a blade, and the smoke slowly dissipated. A group of Kurdish soldiers stood there, eyes wide. The first one, his uniform covered in dust, shouted, "How is this possible?" The metal of the container was melted, but we were kneeling, unharmed, singing the same hymn. Nadia still had her hands raised. Karim wept silently. I could only manage one sentence. God still walks in the midst of the fire. The soldiers were in shock. One of them dropped his rifle and stepped back, making a gesture of reverence. The smell of burning still dominated the air, but inside the container there was a faint fragrance like the sea breeze. I stood up with difficulty and looked around. Everything was destroyed. The walls were twisted, the ground covered in ash, But no burns, no wounds, only dust and the distant sound of the wind passing through the desert. One of the soldiers, the younger one, with brown eyes and a confused expression, stood staring inside. He trembled, his lips moving silently. As he approached, his voice faltered. "I saw 4 people in there." The others laughed, thinking he was in shock, but he insisted, now with tears in his eyes. "I swear, 3 were kneeling, and the 4th was shining like the sun." The silence that followed was absolute. I got goosebumps from head to toe. Nadia looked at me and, without saying a word, smiled. All the soldiers seemed stunned. One of them tried to approach, but the young man pushed him away, saying something in Kurdish that I didn't understand. Then he knelt before us. He began to cry uncontrollably and said, "I don't understand who that room was, but I know he wasn't of this world. His name was Amir." I learned that later when the others led us out of the factory. He walked beside me, still shaken, and kept repeating, "I saw it, I saw it." The Kurdish commander tried to convince him it was his imagination, the effect of the smoke, but Amir shook his head, crying like a child. That fire had burned away his hatred. As the soldiers helped us out, I noticed Amir kept looking at us. It was as if he was trying to find something to explain what he had witnessed. He asked me, "Did you know you were going to survive?" I replied, "No. We only knew we weren't alone." He looked away, took a deep breath, and murmured, "I felt the same." As we drove away from the factory, I looked back. The container was still smoking, partly melted, but still whole enough to tell a story. In the sky, the smoke mingled with the dawn, and I swear that for a second I saw a figure in the mist, not with the eyes of the body, but with those of the soul. The Kurds put us in a vehicle and headed north toward their base. Along the way, Amir remained silent. Sometimes he looked at me, sometimes he looked at the sky. I knew something had changed within him. That man, who until recently might have been our enemy, now seemed to carry something sacred in his gaze. When we arrived at the base, he helped me down from the truck. His hands were trembling. "Youssef," he said, "I want to understand what I saw. I can't sleep. When I close my eyes, I see that 4th man." And he looks back at me. I just put my hand on his shoulder. "What you saw, Amir, was the same as what we felt. The fire didn't kill us because it wasn't meant to destroy us. It was meant to show us who walks with us." Amir remained silent, and then, as if something overwhelmed him, he fell to his knees again. The other soldiers watched, confused. He couldn't hold back his tears. "I don't know who this God is, but I want to know him." Those words echoed like silent thunder. I knew in that instant that the true miracle hadn't just been the fire. It was the heart of an enemy being touched by the divine presence. The following hours were a whirlwind. Doctors examined us, trying to find signs of burns. There was nothing. Our hair, our clothes, even our Bibles, everything intact. One of the doctors murmured, perplexed, "This isn't possible." But it was, because I was there, breathing, seeing, feeling, and there was no human explanation that could erase what we had lived through. Amir brought us food and water. He didn't talk much, but his eyes said it all. He became our guardian. He would stand at the shelter's door, watching the horizon, as if waiting for something more to happen. At night, he called me outside and pointed to the sky. "Youssef, I haven't prayed since I was a child, but when I look at these stars, I feel that someone is listening." I smiled. He always has been. The cold wind blew across the desert, stirring up the surrounding sand. It was as if the sky itself breathed with us. Nadia slept soundly, her head resting on Karim's shoulder. Amir stood there in silence, then said, "I've fought so many wars, killed so many men, but this was the first time I lost and felt free." Those words kept echoing within me. That night I understood something that perhaps only fire could teach. The true miracle is not surviving the flames, but letting them burn away everything that is not eternal. Those days seemed endless. After the miracle, we were taken to Erbil in an improvised military convoy. The desert wind still carried the smell of smoke, and every jolt of the vehicle made my body ache. Nadia held my hand the whole time, but I could barely feel her touch. The fire hadn't left visible marks, but something burned inside me in a different way, as if my body was intact, but my soul had gone through something impossible to describe. I knew I wouldn't leave there the same way I went in. I remember when the hospital gates opened. Doctors rushed toward us, and the cold light of the lamps replaced the golden glow of the desert. The noise of the machines, the sound of hurried footsteps, the smell of medicine, everything was strange. It felt like we had returned to the world, but our hearts were still trapped in the container, in that place where fire and God had met. I was taken to a separate room, and the doctors began examining my back, my lungs, my breathing. One of them asked in broken English, "How did you survive?" I simply replied, "It wasn't us who survived. It was God who decided to let us live." He didn't understand. Nobody understood. How do you explain the inexplicable? The following days were a mixture of pain and silence. Nadia and Karim stayed in another room, receiving bandages and injections. Amir didn't leave the hospital. He slept in the hallways, brought water, talked to the doctors, did everything he could. I saw the change in his eyes, that new gleam, the kind of light that only appears after the soul has passed through fire. One afternoon I asked to see him. The nurse hesitated, saying I needed to rest. But I knew. Time was running out. My body no longer obeyed. Every breath was a victory. She agreed and called Amir. When he entered the room wearing his torn and sand-stained military uniform, something inside me calmed. He seemed like a different man. Not the hardened soldier I knew, but someone who had been born again. I sat up with effort and reached out my hand. He came to me, hesitant, like someone afraid to touch the sacred. "You were the angel God sent," he said weakly, pausing to breathe. "Without you, perhaps the miracle would have ended in the fire." Amir lowered his head and shook slowly. "No, Youssef. I was the enemy. I didn't deserve to see what I saw, but the one who was with you changed everything. What I saw in that container destroyed the man I was." He knelt beside the bed and began to cry, and I saw tears mixed with desert dust streaming down his face. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Then don't cry, because that's exactly what God does. He transforms the destructive fire into a purifying fire." He tried to answer, but the words got stuck in his throat. We remained silent for a few minutes, just listening to the sound of the heart monitor marking the time. Each beat was a reminder that life was still pulsing, even if only for a short time. When he left, I let my gaze wander out the window. The sun was setting, and the golden light streamed into the room. Nadia came in soon after, looking tired. She sat beside me, took my hand and smiled. "You'll be all right," she said, trying to sound confident. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to so badly, but deep down I already knew that fire had left me with a calling, and I was already listening to it. I smiled at her, and in an almost inaudible voice I replied, "If I don't wake up tomorrow, don't cry. Just continue what we started. Promise." She lowered her head and wept silently. Her tears fell onto my hand, and I felt their warmth mingled with the cold that gripped my body. "I promise, Youssef, until the very last day." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I remembered the children in the countryside, the prayers, the nights when we thought God had fallen silent. But now I understood. He was never silent. He just spoke in a different way, sometimes with fire, sometimes with peace. The monitor's sound slowed down. I remember Nadia holding my hand tightly and repeating a prayer between sobs. The last image I saw was her face illuminated by the sunset. And then everything was peaceful. They say time heals, but time doesn't heal what is eternal. Nadia told me later, in the letters she wrote to keep the testimony alive, that it took her weeks to accept that I was gone. Karim remained silent for months, and Amir began visiting the hospital every day, even when there was no longer any reason to. He said he needed to be near the place where God had spoken to him. It was Nadia who had the idea. "We can't let the miracle die with us," she said. "There are children out there who are still living in the fire. Not the fire of the container, but the fire of war, hunger, and loss. We need to bring light to them." Amir immediately agreed, and so the orphanage was born. In the beginning, it was just a tent in the middle of the desert, made from scraps of canvas and pieces of iron left over from the old factory. Over time, others began to help. Doctors, volunteers, even soldiers. The place grew, and what was dust became a shelter. Nadia took a piece of the burned container with her. She had it cut up and turned into a simple cross. That cross was hung on the central wall of the orphanage, where the children could see it every day. Not to remember the suffering, she said, but to remember what God can do within suffering. Amir began caring for the children with the same dedication he once had for a weapon. He told stories, made wooden toys, and taught the little ones to read. Sometimes the children asked about the cross. He always answered with the same phrase, "This cross was made of fire, but the fire did not win." Months later, Amir began recording videos. He was shy, spoke slowly, but each word came out with a force that no one could ignore. "I saw the presence of God in the fire," he would say, looking directly at the camera, "and since that day, no flame can frighten me, because when he is present, the fire becomes a place of miracles." The videos began to spread. People of different religions listened to that former Muslim soldier testify about the God who had transformed him. He never tried to justify himself, never used difficult words. He simply recounted what he saw, what he felt, what had changed. Nadia also began to speak, not about the suffering, but about the love that survives the ashes. "Faith didn't save us from the fire," she said, "but it ensured that we weren't alone in it." The orphanage became a symbol. People from all over the world began sending donations, messages, and prayers. And every time a new child arrived, Amir made a point of showing them the cross. "Touch it," he would say, "because even what the world destroys, God can use to rebuild." I like to think that I'm still there somehow. Maybe in the glow of that cross, maybe in the wind that blows through the desert at dusk. Nadia often says she feels my presence when the sun sets. Karim, now a pastor, visits the orphanage whenever he can and preaches about the purifying fire. And Amir was never the same again. He came to be called the Miracle Man. But he always replied, "I am not the miracle is God who still enters the midst of the flames." One night, during one of the recordings, he said something that will forever be etched in my memory. "The fire destroyed me from the inside before it purified me. I was hatred, revenge, and pride. But when I saw that fourth man, I understood that the light has no enemies, only hearts waiting to be reached." Today, the orphanage still stands, in the same desert where it all happened. The walls are simple, made of mud and wood, but the presence that dwells there is indescribable. When the wind blows, it's possible to hear the children's voices singing in the distance, the same melodies that once echoed inside the container. And in the center of the main wall, the burnt metal cross remains. Rusty, marked by time, but unwavering. It is a silent reminder that fire can consume everything except faith. As evening falls, when the sun dips below the horizon and the sky turns red, Amir usually stands before the cross. Sometimes the cameras capture the golden reflection of the light, hitting the metal and illuminating his face. It's as if the sky itself were confirming everything that happened. And at that moment, he always repeats the same phrase. "The fire tried to destroy us, but we discovered that God doesn't extinguish the flames. He walks within them."
Perhaps you felt something different during this video. Perhaps your heart burned, not with the fire that destroys, but with the fire that awakens. This story isn't just about 3 young people in the desert, but about me, about you, about all of us who one day have to choose between fear and faith. The same God who walked through the fire with Nadia, Yusuf, and Karim is still walking through your fire now. He hasn't forgotten you. He's ready to reach you exactly where you are. And if this message touched your heart, check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Leave a like, and if you've made it to the end, write in the comments, "I love Jesus." This shows that the fire of faith is still alive within you. And get ready. Don't miss the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. A Christian missionary was thrown into a lion's den in Syria, but God showed him he was not alone. You will be awestruck by the power of God in the midst of the impossible.